Everyone, we'll get started now. So welcome to How to Get Unstuck While Learning to Code, and thanks so much for joining us. So today we will be sharing expert tips on how to debug your code and just how to stay motivated and find a community while learning to code. So we hope you enjoy. If you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to submit them in the questions section of GoToWebinar, and we'll get to them during the Q&A period at the end. All right, so here's our agenda. So as you can see, we welcome you to this session. We'll get started out with some introductions for our presenters, and then we'll move right along to tips for debugging and tips for staying motivated, followed by a Q&A section. So I'm happy to introduce you to our presenters. We have Avidor, who is he's an online instructor here at Flatiron School. So if you have been working through one of our online courses, you may have come into contact with him. And we also have Laurence Bradford, who is the founder of Learn to Code with Me, which is an awesome site, blog, and podcast that always shares a ton of awesome resources for those of you who may be learning to code on your own. So I'll let Avidor say hi.
Hey y'all, how are you doing today?
And Laurence, if you want to tune in.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for being here.
Great. So without further ado, I will let Avidor share a little bit about Flatiron School and we'll get started.
Hey everyone, so I'm here from Flatiron School today, and just to tell you guys a little bit about it. We've been around since 2012, and we are a programming boot camp. We've helped over 1,000 students come through and change their career. One of the things we're focusing on right now is increasing the ability for women to learn to code, and that's just been a priority for us right now. And I'll pass it over to Laurence.
Hey everyone, thanks Emily for the intro and for having me here today. As we said already, my name is Laurence Bradford. I am a self-taught techie. I began learning how to code in 2013 while I was living and working in Thailand. I came from a completely different industry. I was actually in economic development at the time. I then started the Learn to Code with Me blog back in 2014 as a way to hold myself accountable and stay motivated while learning. So the topics we're talking about today are very close to home for me. The blog and site has evolved a lot since. I later created Newbie Coder Warehouse, which is a Facebook group for people learning how to code. And more recently, I launched the Learn to Code with Me podcast. That was about 10 months ago. And, since I began learning, a lot has changed. I moved 3 times. Now I live in New York City along with Emily and Avidor, and I work full-time at an ed tech startup called Teachable.
Thanks, Laurence. So Avidor, I'll turn it over to you and we'll learn about debugging.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Emily. All right, so today I just want to go over some tips and tricks for debugging. They'll all kind of be like just high level. We're not going to go over really any specific languages, just some tools that I like to use as I'm trying to figure out what it is my code's doing. So one of the biggest things I always try and focus on is breaking problems down into small, manageable pieces. So right here, I've just got a quick example of something that's not programming related, but just how breaking problems down really helps. So the example is you want to move from Boston to New York. It seems like a daunting task, or at least it did to me. So to try and get through it and find out what had to be done, I had to break everything down to smaller and smaller pieces so it was manageable tasks that I could do. I feel this really relates to programming because every time I look at a new project, there's always so much to do. Even if it's a small project and I'm learning new tools, I know that there's just a lot that I need to learn and I'm not always sure where it is. So I like to break it down to the smallest possible steps. So back to this example real quick. I know that if I'm moving, I've got to pack up my house, I've got to rent the moving truck, I've got to find an apartment, and it can start to become overwhelming. So then just focus on one bit, packing up the house. If I'm going to pack up the house, I need to buy boxes, tape, packing materials. And that's something that's something I know how to do, or at least I can start down that path. So the same thing will happen with programming. If you're just starting out and you're learning your first bits and pieces of code, just try and break everything down to the smallest possible pieces and questions that you can ask, and then focus on that one thing so you can solve it and keep moving forward. Just to recap a little bit, I'm not sure we got cut off, just breaking down problems on how it relates to programming is that, as you're going through and learning to program, you're going to want to start to build larger and larger things. And as you do that, just remember to keep breaking it down into small pieces so that you're able to manageably learn different chunks and different parts of the language or best practices so that you can kind of keep building these new and amazing tools. I'm going to move on to the next slide now. And next I want to talk about reading error messages. Let's see. All right, perfect. There it came through. So reading error messages. This is another really helpful tool for debugging when I started learning to program. I just remember the first times I see error messages, they're always really scary. There's a lot of text there that I don't understand. I know before I started programming, even error messages would pop up on programs, and unless it was like a really short, specific sentence, I would just be like, well, there's way too much here for me to understand and read. I'll never know what it is. Just skip it. But as you start learning to program and you yourself become a web developer, there's probably a few things more important than being able to understand error messages. So I'd say start off just try and read them and see what you can understand, see what you can make of it. And as an example here, I just have some Ruby code. You don't have to be familiar with Ruby here, but we just got this error message. And it starts about halfway through here where the red box is and keeps going down. And we can just by reading that first line, even if you don't know exactly what it is, we have argument error, wrong number of arguments. So if you don't know what an argument is, it seems important. That word comes up twice in this error message. But we know we have the wrong number of something. So we can start kind of looking around to see what's going on there. If you don't understand any of this at all, you can just sort of copy and paste it into Google. And there are tons of excellent resources online if you paste in an error message. As you're starting out, one I'd recommend looking into is Stack Overflow. It's usually in the top 4 or 5 results whenever I Google my error messages. Just a great site for people who have run into the same types of problems that you're going to be running into, and then other people who have helped out, found solutions, and posted them online to really help everybody out. So I guess the big takeaway here is that just try and break down that fear of error messages and at least try and read them, because even if they'll start off not making any sense, the more you look at them, the more you'll be able to start seeing. So another quick example from this one, this is, I'd say, pretty common in most error messages. We have some line numbers. So right below the red box, there's line number 1, then line number 4. So those start kind of giving us clues as to where the problem is. And I would just really, really encourage taking a look at those. And then finally, I want to talk about checking your assumptions. So this is something I guess that always trips me up as I'm working through my code. I'll be running my code, I'll be getting these error messages, and I'm not sure where things are broken. So then I'll kind of work back and check what my assumptions are. So by that, I mean kind of looking into what your variables equal. So as you're writing code, you'll need to use variables to store information. And just make sure all of your variables are what you think they are. So if you have a program that maybe is writing a recipe to make pasta, you want to make sure that your list of ingredients variable is actually a list of ingredients. So you can do that if you have tools to kind of break into the code and check the variables. Ruby has something called pry, and JavaScript uses debugger. But even if you don't have those tools, pretty much every programming language has a way to print to the screen. So you can use, in Ruby, it's puts. You can use console.log in JavaScript just to find out, is this what I think it is? And the other great part about using some sort of output message that prints to the screen is you can move that around to just say things like hello, just to make sure your code actually ran, to make sure that that line of code, everything is running up into that point. I know I run into problems when I have like an if statement somewhere in my code, and I'm pretty sure that it's working, but after all the errors I'm getting, I'm like, I should probably go back and check, and I'll just put a print to the screen like this code ran. And if I'm not seeing it, I know I'm not running that line of code. I'm not running that if statement, even though it's something that I had assumed was happening. So always important to kind of go back if you can't figure out what's going on, go back and sort of check your assumptions and see, and it basically confirm that everything is working the way you think it should, all the parts leading up to your error. And then finally, you won't be able to solve everything on your own. So everything I've gone over so far, just being able to break things down into smaller pieces, look at error message, checking your assumptions, that's usually you sitting in front of your computer, like looking at your code and working on it. And that's not always going to get you there. So another important thing to be able to do is to ask for help. If you're on the Flatiron School site, LearnCode, we have a built-in tool for Ask a Question. As Laurence was saying, there's also the Facebook group, Newbie Coders. I previously mentioned Stack Overflow, so if you're really stuck, you can ask a question there. There's some other tools online like Gitter and HackHands and Code Mentor where you can go to chat with other developers, sometimes be paired with developers that can lend a hand. And I think that's really going to segue us into the next section here when I will let Laurence take over.
Hey, yeah, thank you. Yeah, what you were talking about Code Mentor and HackHands, and those are definitely tools I've used in the past, and they can be really helpful because they set you up directly with a person that's more experienced, and they can kind of tutor you or help you through a problem that you're stuck on. But in any case, I'm going to be talking more about staying motivated and finding a community. So the first thing you can do as you're learning is to try teaching someone else. So I think a huge misconception that many beginners believe is that they're too new to help other people. But that's not true at all. And also, teaching doesn't mean like literally standing in front of a classroom teaching. There are lots of ways to teach, and you don't need to be an expert to get started. It could literally just be helping someone who knows less than you do. So I wrote down a few examples here about of ways you could teach someone else. One thing is starting a blog, and that's something that I did pretty early on when I was learning to code. You can write tutorials, you can write about the industry, you can interview other people in the field. All of it is going to help you learn more and at the same time give back to others. I also wrote down have a podcast, which is something else I did later on because I know some people don't enjoy writing, and let me tell you, I learned so much from interviewing guests on the show. Another thing you could do to teach someone else is to talk at meetups. So it could be like a lightning talk, so something really quickly, or another kind of presentation. And as I mentioned before, you can simply just tutor a friend who's more of a beginner than you are. So kind of related to teaching others, something else you could do is collaborate with others. And there's several examples that I have listed here, and I'm sure most people are familiar with these, but maybe not. The first I have is a hackathon. So these are kind of maybe 1 day to like 3 day, maybe even longer events that take place where people are put into groups and they work together to build projects in a limited amount of time. Another way that you could collaborate with other people is through in-person courses or workshops. This is actually something that I really I love to do. I'm not a huge fan of networking events, but I love to go to like workshops and other kinds of classes where there is an instructor teaching and I can learn. And a lot of times in these classes you can, or there'll be times where you'll break off into groups and work on a project or a in-class assignment together. Something else you can do is side projects. I'm a huge fan of these. So maybe like you and your friend can build some kind of mini app together. If you're in like the Learn.co program, I know there's people you can probably connect with and build a project together. Another way you can collaborate with other people is to do freelance work. So many people think that freelancing, you're on your own, which can be true. However, when I first started out, I would work kind of like as a contractor for web development agencies, and usually that gave me the chance, or actually always gave me the chance to work with someone more senior than me, and also get paid. So I was basically learning from someone as I was getting paid to learn. And finally, this is something a lot of people I think don't think about, but you can pick up a project at your current job if you're working full time that will allow you to flex your tech skills. You may be surprised how many ways you can incorporate coding into your current role, especially if you work at a company that is supportive of you learning tech skills, or in the least skills that are tangentially related to tech. So let's just say that you work in marketing. Maybe you could push to take on a project where you'll be A/B testing different landing pages or home pages of the website. A project like this will allow you to learn a new tech skill, A/B testing, and perhaps even work with engineers at the company. So another thing you can do is get offline. Again, this is very much so related to the first 2 points about kind of working with others and finding this community. But I think it's really easy to get frustrated when you're alone, in your small apartment, stuck on a problem, sitting at your computer. Sometimes it's good to just get outside and have a change of pace, right? So we did touch upon some of these things in the previous slides, but to recap, a great way to get offline is to go to meetups and other local events in your area. So study groups, hack nights, maybe a happy hour or something. Beyond that, workshops or courses, so more of a classroom-like setting rather than a happy hour. Again, I prefer these. If you're looking for meetup groups, Girl Develop It has a lot of chapters across the country, so does Women Who Code. Another, which is more, not so much of a workshop, but more of a casual kind of a get-together and code, is Free Code Camp, and they have groups all across the country as well. Another way to get offline is conferences. So these are a little different because they will usually cost a significant amount of money for several days, and a lot of times people will travel to go to conferences. But let's just say if you live in the middle of, I don't know, you live in Minnesota or something, and you really want a job in let's just use New York as an example. You really want a job in New York. It may be worth it to go to an event or a conference in New York for a few days, because it'll also allow you to start building a network there and make connections in that city. And so if you're looking for a job there, that would be immensely helpful when you're at that stage of looking for a job, to have those connections in place. And another thing that I absolutely love is just getting coffee with someone and meeting them, meeting a person one-on-one. I definitely prefer this as someone a bit more introverted than going to a big, I don't know, happy hour with 30 people I don't know, just being kind of in that one-on-one setting. And it's also a great way to learn more about the industry. So ideally, you would be trying to have coffee with someone in a dream job that you want, and you can ask them questions about the role, hopefully get some advice from them, especially if you're stuck on certain problems, and kind of the best next step, the best next steps to take. I will say, as someone who's lived in several cities over the last few years, it's a lot easier for me to do this now in New York, where it's much more densely populated, than when I was living in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania a few years ago. Nonetheless, I think tech is so widespread across the country that even small cities do have some kind of tech community. Okay, and aside from getting offline, another thing I would highly recommend if you're kind of feeling stuck and losing motivation as you're learning is to put hard deadlines for yourself. So I'll share an example of what I mean. I redid my Learn to Code with Me blog in 2015. So I totally rebuilt the site from the ground up, and I customized everything, and a lot went into it. I gave myself a hard date to launch the site by. If I remember correctly, I think it was April 1st. I had it in my calendar. I wrote it down on sticky notes, and it just kind of really cemented that in my head that that was the date that I was going to launch this website by. I have this saying, and it's if it's not in my calendar, it doesn't exist. And I think just kind of keep that mentality and seeing these dates, even if it's just for myself, it's super, super helpful. So aside from like doing that with a project, you could also do this with a course. So say you want to finish a certain picture goal and then a date to do it by will allow you to better break down that bigger goal into smaller pieces. So you know what you have to do on a week by week or day by day basis to make it to that goal, which may even be like a few months later. So after setting deadlines for yourself, and this is somewhat related to goal setting, but when you're feeling especially stuck, just remind yourself what it is that you're working towards. So maybe it is getting out of a dead-end career. Maybe you'd like to pursue something more meaningful and feel like you're building something. You're building and it's really exciting. Or maybe a bit differently, you just want flexibility in your day-to-day. You don't want to be in an office from 9 to 5. You want to be able to work from anywhere. You want a job that is flexible enough where you can go travel for a few weeks and just work from wherever, or be a digital nomad, I guess that's the right saying. So when you feel really, really stuck, just kind of realign yourself with those bigger picture goals and what you're working towards. And I wish there was like a one size fits all approach to how to do this, but because everyone is different, there's not. But I have some friends, for example, that will make vision boards. So maybe on their computer, there's actually a site called dreamitalive.com, or I think it's .com. If you Google Dream It Alive, you'll find it, and it is like a virtual vision board. Of course, you could do this physically as well by like having cutting out magazine images and text and putting that all on the board. You could even use Pinterest, so just like pinning different images and visuals that represent your greater goals to this board. Another example of kind of like keeping those bigger goals in mind, my friend does this. I think it's really cool. She will set her next big goal as her phone background or like an image that represents it. So let's just say that you're learning how to code, you want to become a software developer, and your dream job would be to be a software engineer at Google. What you could do is take the Google logo and set that as your phone background. And then every time you look at your phone, you'll see that Google logo, and it'll kind of remind you what you're working towards. So another thing, and this I feel like now it doesn't really fit with the slide mastermind group, but I think it's a really good strategy for just working towards goals in general. If you're not familiar with the term, Napoleon Hill first introduced this concept, and it can really vary, but it's essentially a group of like-minded people, but also different people that are working towards the same goal. So I'm pretty sure like Napoleon Hill's case, it would have been like business type of things. But for you, it could be a group of people that are all working to get jobs in tech, right? Maybe not the same. Maybe not everyone wants to be a software engineer, but maybe one person wants to be a UI designer. Maybe another person wants to be a mobile app developer. Maybe someone else wants to be a front-end web developer, whatever. And then you get together. It could be virtually, it could be in person too, and you check in weekly. You share what you did the last week. You share any struggles or like blockers that you're experiencing in reaching your goal, and then you also talk about what you're going to do the upcoming week to take steps towards achieving that goal. I've done this. I've been in like mastermind groups. I don't know I forget if we actually officially called it that, but I've been in groups with other people where I have met weekly on Skype. And it was really, really helpful during the time and having me work towards that goal, because it's just really a way to stay accountable, right? It's like, every Tuesday at 6 p.m. you're meeting with this group of people, and you have to tell what you did in the last week to work towards your goals. So when you remember that, it's really going to force you to take steps because they're holding you accountable. But at the end of the day, you just have to get started, right? So we have a few awesome resources for you that can help you get started. For me on my site, and I guess, I don't know if you'll have access to the slides, but I have this getting started guide. Well, I have a few things. I have a getting started guide, and the URL to that is learntocodewith.me/where to learn, and there's dashes between them. But aside from that formal guide, I also have my podcast. You can find that at learntocodewith.me/podcast. I interview a bunch of people on the show who are in tech and work in various roles and have great conversations with them. I also have my blog, which you can find on the site. And a bit more recently, I also write articles on Forbes that all pertain to technology and careers. So if you're especially kind of wanting like more career-related resources, that's a great place to go as well. And Avidor, I don't know if you want to talk about the Flatiron resources that you guys have.
Yeah, I'd love to. So at the Flatiron School, we have a handful of free courses online. We have an Intro to Ruby course, Intro to JavaScript, Swift, and Bootcamp Prep course. All of those courses are designed for someone coming in with zero programming experience. We teach everything just really from the ground up. So you don't have to have any knowledge beforehand. If you want to access them, again, we'll be sending out the slides, but if you go to flatironschool.com, and check out the courses there, you'll be able to access the free courses, sign up, and get onto our course site, which is learn.co, which is where we have that ask a question button that I was speaking about earlier, where you get connected with the community and our team of Learn experts to help answer any questions you have as you're going through the course. And if it turns out that that's something you're really interested in, you really like it, we also have some larger, more career change-oriented courses.
Yeah, awesome. So we'll now shift gears into our Q&A section. We've had a couple of great questions come in, but feel free to keep sending them along, and Avidor and Laurence will be answering them. So for the first one, either of you could really take this, I think, and I think it's an awesome question. So when you're experiencing a problem, what's the best way to know if it's a problem that you should keep working on and figure out yourself, or if it's something that you should maybe ask for help for, or look around in your community for some help?
I can grab that one, at least to start off. I would say there's no specific type of problem that you're supposed to solve on your own, and no specific type that you're supposed to ask the community. I would say it probably comes down to just time spent. So if you've already been working on that one problem for maybe an hour or two, depending upon the size of the problem, and you're just not making any progress, and you've kind of exhausted the resources that you can get from easily Googling around and checking out those error messages, I would say then, it's to the point where you've done a whole bunch of work, you don't know the path forward. It's definitely time just to get a little bit of input. Someone can just nudge you in the right direction with a small bit of information that will give you what you need. So I don't think there's any problem so small that you'd be able to say, no, this is the community wouldn't want to hear this. It's too simple. I should be able to figure this out. If you've been working on it for a while and you can't figure it out, definitely ask.
Awesome. Thanks, Avidor. Laurence, did you want to jump in and add anything there?
Yeah, I think Avidor, your answer was really great. I just chat a little bit. I always veer on the side of asking for help more. I guess that's also maybe just my personality. I think about back in my high school days or college days, I was always the person raising their hand, asking additional questions. So I think that's kind of me by nature. And we mentioned these resources earlier, but especially when I would get stuck and I was working on something, and this would be even a freelance project I was working on for a client, or I mentioned I did some contracting for web development agencies early on. This could have even been a project related to that, or my own kind of project. I would go on Code Mentor or HackHands, and I would find someone to help me. And that does cost money. Well, it depends on the tutor that you go with and the platform. They could have changed the way things are priced now. I haven't used them in quite a bit, so definitely look into that. But when I was using it more, it would cost money, but it was an awesome way to work through that problem. And I think what Avidor said is time spent, because time is money. So if you're spending days and days and days stuck on something, like even if you have to shell out a bit to get that one-on-one help using Code Mentor or HackHands, I totally think it's worth it because, yeah, as I said, time is money. So if you're spending days on one thing, there's so much other stuff you could be doing and moving on with.
For sure. I think that's great advice. I guess sort of a follow-up question to that. Are there any things that you should absolutely do before you ask a question or you ask for help? Like, are there any, total no-brainer things that you should do before you sort of loop somebody in and lean on someone else's time?
Oh, I can jump since I just answered the last one. Just jump on this real quick, but yeah. So I think it also really depends on who you're asking. So, for instance, if I'm paying someone on HackHands or Code Mentor to help me, I don't really feel like I need to do that much research up front. Other scenario, if I'm emailing someone like a web developer friend that I have, and I've definitely done this too, it's always best to research it as much as you can before you kind of lean on them for help. So research Stack Overflow, Google, and even then when you're asking them, kind of like show evidence that you've already looked into the issue. So you're like, hey, so-and-so, I have a question about X. I found this article in Stack Overflow, but it's a little old. I then found this in, this other forum, but it's not exactly what I'm looking for. Like, do you have any insights on this or something? So at least you're showing them that you did kind of research the issue, because and I have a lot of people emailing me asking questions all the time, and I know sometimes when someone asks me something that I know they could have just Googled, it's kind of like, dude, you could have just Googled that. Like, there's like, if you Google that phrase, like there's 1,000 articles already written that show up, So it just kind of feels like you're being taken advantage of your time, like if someone asks a question, they didn't do any research beforehand.
Yeah, I would agree with Laurence here that really just I would say the bare minimum is usually Googling, because you can knock out a quick Google search in like a few seconds, especially if it's like from an error message and it's just copy paste, and then just like click around at the first few links, and then as you said, if you're going to somewhere like HackerHands or you have someone available that can give you this advice that you're paying them for, you don't have to do quite as much. I mean, yeah, just like glancing through your notes if you have any. If you're using Learn, maybe looking back at previous lessons. But I don't think the bar for asking for help should be too high.
Great. So another great question we got is, how do you keep from starting too many beginner projects and not finishing any of
them? I guess I'll hop in on this one. Keep from starting too many. I guess that really depends upon what each person thinks too many is. But I actually really like what Laurence was talking about earlier, where it's setting deadlines. So if you have a lot of projects stacking up, maybe just try and like pick the one that's most important to you and set like, I've got to get this one done by a certain date and work towards that. And that will kind of force you to let the less important projects, the ones you're not as excited about, to sort of take the back seat while you can focus on one. And I think there's a lot of importance to being able to finish projects, because while it's fun, like having all these ideas and starting to build things, you want to be able to, if you're learning programming just as a hobby for fun, you want to be able to build the thing you wanted. And if you're learning programming to sort of make a career change, you want to be able to show potential employers like, hey, like I built a thing, like all the way through. So I guess what I'd probably try and say here is just set those deadlines for yourself. And then if you realize like you can't finish the whole project by this point, at least break out a section of the project, break it down to a smaller bit, and set goals for building certain parts of the project so you can put them all together later.
Yes, awesome. That was awesome advice. And I am speaking as someone who used to, when I first started learning, I started so many projects and little things that I never finished and that I would kind of just stop working on maybe after a few days, maybe after a few weeks. And now I actually never do that. And I think part of it for me at least was kind of like maturity and just becoming more strategic with decisions I made. And maybe it was something I acquired also on my own / growing up and whatnot. But I guess you could say I was very scattered before. I think I still can be sometimes a little scattered, but I got a lot better at just about prioritizing. And I think what Avidor said that was awesome is that you really also need to focus on your like greater goals. So he mentioned, kind of being a hobbyist versus a career changer. So if you're just a hobbyist, you're just learning to code on your free time, just out of interest, you have no you're not actually trying to become like a software engineer or some other thing in tech. Sure, like play around with different projects, start new things, like have fun. However, on the other hand, if you're looking to make a career transition, especially in a relatively short time, like 3 to 9 months, building projects, having them on GitHub, and finishing them is really important. And I would say also being mindful of the projects that you build. So I'm trying to think of a good example here. Let's just say if your dream job is to work at like Seamless or Grubhub, which if you're not familiar, it's like the food ordering websites, right? Or food delivery websites. If that was your dream job, a great project you could work on would be something that related to food, right? Or delivery, or was kind of like related in some way to like your dream job. So then when you're interviewing for these kinds of roles, in these industries, you have a project that relates to that. So that's something else I would say is building something that you're passionate about. So before I started the Learn to Code with Me blog, I did a bunch of other like random blogs and random web apps and random things that I never finished because quite honestly, I wasn't really that interested in this subject. But with Learn to Code with Me, like helping people learn to code, like empowering people to learn to code, talking to people in the industry, that is something that I wasn't super interested in, and I'm still interested in, luckily, and that's why, almost 3 years later, I'm still doing it because I have a genuine passion and interest for it.
Awesome, Laurence. You actually answered someone else's question in the process of answering that question, which was what types of projects should you do before you reach out to potential employers? So I think you really hit on on something great there, which is just that, it matters what direction you take projects in. And while it's great that, you just finish projects and learn through them and have something to show for it. I think if you have a really specific goal in mind, then, cater your projects towards that goal and really make them specific. So that's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. It's also, sorry, one other thought that came to my mind when you just mentioned that. Another thing, and this is something I don't think you should, if you're building projects in that early kind of discovery phase, you shouldn't worry about this too much. I certainly didn't with Learn to Code with Me until I had been working on it for like 6 months or something. But growing, also whatever it is, can be huge. So what I mean growing is getting like an audience to it or getting users if you build some kind of app. And I say this because actually with my job I have today at Teachable, I was given a job offer in like 9 days, like not even work days, like 9 days. I like interviewed, came to New York, was made an offer basically. And a huge reason why, and I kind of found this out later, it happened so fast, was because not only did I have this blog, I also had an audience and a community around it. So it was like, yes, she built something, but then she also like continued with it, and it was relevant to the job at Teachable, and so it had relevancy. And it also, I showed that I could attract people, right? So it was combining all these different things into one. So it's like, that would kind of be the next step, I guess, like after like building something that's related to the career you want. If you get a job right away and you're happy, awesome. But you could also keep working on that project, refining it, and then getting some kind of community around it, which would even be more impressive to employers.
Totally. I think that's a great piece of advice. One other awesome question we got was that, Avidor, you mentioned that looking through your notes when asking a question is important, and this question asker asks, they get a little bit bogged down and take too many notes. Do you have any advice or tips for really good ways to take notes?
That's a good question. Yeah, I guess for taking notes, there's definitely a ton of tools out there for that. I've used Evernote, which I'm not going to say it probably doesn't have the best tools for taking programming notes, but I try and keep my notes as much as I can focused around code snippets and then link out to a lot of information I have is from like the Learn Code website, so link back to lessons and back to where I learned it. So I, at some point or another, found a good resource that helps me understand some tool. So in addition to trying to take as condensed notes as possible, just like this is what the code looks like when it's working properly. So when I'm working on a project later, I can copy paste it. And then here's the resource that I used, or here's the resource where I learned about it, so that if I need more information, I can at least backtrace my steps a little bit. And then I would not specifically recommend Evernote, but just something digital, so it's searchable. Because trying to look through notebooks and all this is going to get really difficult really fast with the amount of information. And that being said, I probably don't rely too heavily on my notes. I do a lot of Googling around for the documentation for the tool that I'm using.
Great, that's an awesome answer. Another question that we had was from somebody who's actually doing bootcamp prep with Flatiron School right now, and they are saying that they, are learning and they're understanding what the lessons are trying to teach them, but they are curious about how they can find out why these lessons are applicable and how they might use these skills in the real world. So I guess part of what this question is getting at is, you're learning how to use a skill, but it's hard to stay motivated or maybe for it to stick if you can't really visualize how it will serve you in the future. Do you have any advice for finding out for yourself how things will be useful or applicable?
So just to start off hopping on this one here, I think that's one thing that's a little bit difficult about learning to program sometimes, is there's so many small things and small parts that you need to get going. I remember the first time I started learning, I was learning about how to print something to the screen, so in JavaScript, console.log, and I was like, why do I need this? I could just type it out. How is this helpful? How is it useful? How is it important? I don't know, I didn't see it. But it would have made it real difficult for me to get to other places in the course and be able to build things without having that tool. So I guess it is really difficult starting out and learning these tools that just don't immediately seem helpful. If you want to try and see some quicker results, you could try, if you think of something small to build, and see if you can break it down into smaller and smaller pieces to better understand, what you might be using these tools for, and then try and maybe build something that you want to build that's not part of the curriculum. Just build something and then start seeing the problems you run into. And then you'll probably start seeing the reasons for things like console.log or manipulating arrays. But yeah, it is difficult starting out, I'd say, seeing these really basic programming functions and syntaxes. Do I really need this? How is this helpful to me? I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Laurence.
I guess more on a bigger picture kind of level. There is so much you can learn when it comes to programming and technology. There's hundreds of languages and there's so many things that just different skills that aren't even coding that still relate to tech that you can learn. It can be super overwhelming, knowing which path to take, right? It's something that has been super helpful to me, and I think it really could be helpful to anyone, is looking at dream job listings or so something you would maybe want one day. Maybe you're not just ready for that job yet, you don't have the skills yet, but maybe in a few years or even a few months you could be. So looking at those kind of jobs, and also keep in mind the companies too. So not just the title, the company that you would like to work at as well, and see what they're looking for. I am an avid job alert subscriber or whatever. I have job alerts coming in every single day from Glassdoor, LinkedIn, The Muse, all these places. And I scan them constantly just to see who's hiring for what roles. And whenever a company that I like sticks out, I click on that role and just take a glance at some of the things that they're looking for in this position that, yeah, sure, maybe right now I'm not ready for that, but maybe in a few years I would like to be. I'm oh, okay, that's interesting. So they're looking at someone who does, so for me, I'm actually more interested right now in product management kind of roles, but I'm oh, so they're looking at someone who does more roadmap management, whereas there's other roles looking for someone who's more QA, so like testing out new features before they go live. And I kind of I'll make note of these in like a separate area, in a separate doc, so then when I have time to take courses and I'm looking at what to learn next, I can go back to that list and know, oh, so these few companies I'd love to work at one day are looking for a product manager who knows these skills. Okay, I should focus on those. So it's kind of like reverse engineering what you should learn, because again, there's just so much out there and you want to make sure you're staying focused and learning the stuff that is going to apply to the jobs that you want. Otherwise, yeah, it's just too easy to lose focus.
Awesome. Those are great suggestions. So one other question we got is, in your experience, what is the most frustrating part of learning to code? Is it syntax, debugging, large amount of code to crunch through, etc.? And I guess a follow-up question to think about while you're answering that one is, what is the biggest breakthrough that you've had in your journey so far?
I'll jump in and start and talk about the most frustrating thing about learning to code. And I think it's just kind of whenever I'm working on my own on something, and I've been working on it for hours and hours, I've been Googling around, trying to find out, like, what is my code doing? Like, trying to check my assumptions, break it down into smaller parts, find out, like, where this is even breaking, and then after all that work, still being lost. So I'd say probably the most frustrating thing is trying to code alone. It can just be like really isolating and really confusing, because I can be like hours into debugging something, and it's really like when I eventually go and have some time to ask somebody for help or find something that's available, I find out like, oh, like with their 10-minute explanation of like just the general idea of how things are working, I am now like totally unstuck. And not that everything's working, but I now have a path forward and I can see where to go. So it's just kind of like being so lost, I'd say. And the solution is really asking for help, talking to other people, and just having any sort of collaboration.
Yeah, wait, sorry, Emily, what was the second part of the question that you then mentioned?
Oh, just that, if you have any particular breakthroughs or moments when you
Oh.
had a breakthrough in something that was frustrating to you.
Okay, got it, sorry. Yeah, so for me, one of the most frustrating things would be, thinking that you understood something. So like, again, I used to do all these little like side projects when I was starting out, and I was trying to, I remember like building I can't even remember what this little app was, but it had like login features and things like that. And thinking I was doing something the right way, and then like realizing hours later I wasn't, and I had to like backtrack, or no, it's just that like that high and low feeling of feeling like, yeah, I'm doing awesome, I know what I'm doing, and then kind of like realizing, oh wait, I don't know anything right now, like I have no idea what I'm doing, like I thought I knew what I was doing and now I don't. And that could just be like so, I don't even know the right word to use, like demoralizing, just like frustrating, like you just want to, give up entirely then. So that for me, like with the learning process, was definitely probably one of the hardest things. And then, and kind of related even to this day, like there's times with my current job, I remember like back in November, we were releasing this really new feature, and like all this stuff went into it, and like me and one of my coworkers did a presentation in front of the company. Like we had like this like 20-page really pretty like document about everything, and then we had another meeting with some of the engineers, and it was like, oh, by the way, XYZ doesn't work the way we thought it did. We have to like go back to the drawing board. Now, in like these things could be avoided like with more communication and conversation early on, but again, it's one of those feelings of like putting all this time and effort towards something, realize, oh wait, it's actually not the way we thought it was, or it's not the way you thought it is, and then you kind of have to go back and from scratch and like rethink about it, or whatever, go redo it. So that's kind of the most frustrating thing. And then I guess you asked what was like a breakthrough moment. This isn't really, I mean, it's related to being frustrated and stuff, but for me, honestly, a huge breakthrough moment was that little like tip I mentioned before about looking at job ads, seeing what they're learning or seeing what they're looking for, and then basing your own like learning path off of that. For me, when I first started out, like the first year and a half, I was all over the place. I would learn like Ruby, then I would learn like Python, then I would go learn JavaScript, and then I would go, learn something else. Then finally, when I sat down, spent like, I don't know, maybe an hour or two looking at job listings that I actually wanted and realized all the job listings I wanted were looking for like a core set of skills and I wasn't even focusing on those. That was definitely a breakthrough.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you had that breakthrough. So I guess we have time for one more question. And we have, so if you're working on a problem and you find an answer on Stack Overflow, but you're having a hard time understanding what you're reading, what people have suggested, what do you do then?
Well, first of all, I would try and just check and see if that solution works. Like, can you take the solution posted by somebody, put it into your code, and just confirm that it works, first of all. Once that happens, once you have like working code, you can start playing around with it, checking what your variables are, and just trying to walk through the code to understand it. If you're still like super lost and have no idea what's going on, I would say take a step back for a second and just try to think like, is this something that I really, really need to know? One example I would say where I feel like I don't necessarily need to know is like a regex statement, which is you can take a like a word or a string, as it would be called in programming, and be able to like run this statement by a regex statement saying like, is this a valid email? So does it have some text, then an @ sign, then some more text, and then a dot, and then a little bit more text. And someone can write like a really short statement that says, this will check and confirm it's a valid email. Like, I don't ever want to write that. I don't think I ever really need to understand that entirely, but I can feel pretty comfortable using that in my code. So the first thing I'd say is, how much do you think you really need to know this? If you're trying to, for example, learn JavaScript, and this is like a lot of JavaScript that you found a solution to, then it might be a good time to ask for help. And I think this can kind of go back a little bit to what Laurence was saying, where you want to do your research. So that would be a really great thing to, like, if you were using a tool, maybe like Hacker Hands or something like that, where you're paying someone for help and say, hey, like, this is my problem. This is what I've been running into. This is the solution I found, but I don't understand it. That is incredibly helpful when you're asking somebody else for help, just to like show that you've done all this work and that you've gotten very far. You just need like a little bit more to fill in your understanding. So I guess that would be the advice I'd say is like, you want to ask questions there and just make sure you present all this excellent information and research that you've done.
Laurence.
Yeah, that was oh, yeah, I was gonna say I don't have like a ton to add on that, but it's just kind of going with like the idea of not learning to code alone. When you put yourself like in a community, and whether that's like through like the Flatiron or Learn.co community, it could even be like at a at your workplace, or maybe through freelance work if you're working for like a development agency or for another company where there's more senior people. When you do have moments where you're stuck on something, having those people around you to ask for help is immensely, immensely helpful. I just used the word help twice, but and that's also why I always encourage people to try to get like quote unquote real world experience early on. So again, whether it's taking on more code related projects in your current full-time job or freelancing, especially if you're doing it with other people, you're going to have the opportunity to work with people like more senior than you and be able to ask them questions. So say you are Googling something about, you're stuck on a Stack Overflow question and answer, you're not sure how to implement it in your own case. You could ask that more senior dev what they would do, and they could help you out.
Totally. Great. All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up. Thank you so much both to Avidor and Laurence for taking the time to share your expertise with us. It was super awesome. And to all our attendees out there, thank you for joining us. You can keep an eye out for a follow-up email with a recording of the webinar and the slides. Yeah, and we hope you'll join us again soon. Have a great day, everyone.